Alhamdulillah, where is that? But the Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalatu wassalamu ala ashrafil anbiya wal mursaleen wa alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Dear brothers, Dato and colleagues, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. And to be punctual, we have to start the session now. And we have already the audience online, I think 3 times, 4 times more than what we have here. So with this, today's session basically is a series of this Islamization of human knowledge. And we have previously many speakers who spoke about Islamization and integration of knowledge. So we want to move forward from philosophy, the theory base, to the practical, the application part of it. Alhamdulillah, we have heard before, not from the horse's mouth, but their trainees. We had Naqib Alata's ideas, and we have Dr. Ugi last time, who spoke because he was a direct trainee under him. Then we have Prof. Kamal's idea spoken by Prof. Mumtaz Ali. And then we have lastly Dr. Imtiaz, Prof. Imtiaz, who actually was directly under the supervision, rather he was the students of Al-Faruqi marhum. So all these 3, to me, great scholars, they have left behind the imprints. And now we have the younger generation, our next generation, to carry forward the mission. But I'm more concerned about the practical side of it, because application has to go to the areas which are professional: medicine, engineering, economics, business, law, and whatnot. So we started last week. Actually, we have the panel of the speakers. One of them was Yang Berbahagia Dato' Murad himself, Nasreen and Dr. Ain, all of them. So we are now going group of speakers. So today's session, in fact, we have 2 speakers. One is sitting in front of us here, Associate Professor Dr. Fontaine. Actually, his full name is, normally I call him Dr. Ridwan, his Muslim name or Islamic name. And but he's Rodrigue Fontaine and full name. And when I talk to him, you are British or you are French? So he always never give straight answers. He said, depends which team wins the World Cup. So if the British wins, then I'm British. So if the French team wins the football World Cup, then I'm French. So this is his answer. Maybe during the presentation, he can clarify that issue. So today, then he will talk about on Islamization of management knowledge, or management from the Islamic perspective. Then we have a second speaker. She is connected already. She would be speaking online. And she is really going to touch upon the very recent phenomena. Where are you, Maria? Okay. The phenomena in terms of the artificial intelligence, the makers and breakers of the modern world. So let us listen to both of them. Without further ado, I would like to invite our Dean, Yang Berbahagia Dato' Abdul Aziz Bargut, to say a few words of welcome, and then followed by the first speaker by Dr. Fontaine.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. Dear brothers and sisters, our professors, our participant here in the Ibn Khaldun room, and also the people who are joining us via Zoom. Welcome to our lecture today in the series of the futures of integration of knowledge and sustainable development or civilizational development. We have started this almost, I think, 2 years now. And today we are having, I think, 22nd lecture engaging our two very respected and learned scholars in two different topics, but they are interrelated based on this idea of Islamization or integration of knowledge. But they are addressing, as Prof. Khaliq mentioned, maybe some of the practical, some of the down-to-earth aspects, especially management or artificial intelligence or sciences. I think that's really a very good development towards enhancing this series of the futures of integration of knowledge, especially with our university today and our rector focusing on Tawhidic epistemology and its implications and applications in different disciplines. I think I really need to thank Professor Khaliq for moving forward in this agenda. It falls directly in what is happening in our university. With this, once again, welcome everyone, especially our two scholars. It's really a great honor to have Associate Professor Rizwan here, and our scholar, second scholar, our sister, I think, all the way from Kashmir or where she is now. And she is really a very promising young scholar. So with this, thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.
Thank you, Mbarbagi and Dato, for your welcoming remarks. So without any delay, I would like to pass the floor to our first speaker, whom I just introduced, our Dr. Fontaine. Thank you, please.
Okay, so assalamu alaikum barakatuh. So as Prof. Khaliq introduced me, I'm half British, half French. I actually have two passports that is allowed in the French and British system. And as Prof. Khaliq was talking, I was thinking, am I more French or more English today? And unfortunately, the whole of Europe is in a mess. The British are in a mess. They have major economic problems. The French also in a mess, a complete mess, social, political, and economic. So I would actually like to say for today, I'm Malaysian. So I inshallah, my wife is Malaysian, so I can use that as my excuse. So having settled that question, let me start with the presentation, inshallah. So, okay, there we are.
Yeah.
Whoops. So the topic that I have chosen, I've called it Islamization, an Islamic management perspective. Actually, it could be a management perspective. For me, there's not that much difference between Islamic management and management, except that, of course, in Islamic management, we would emphasize the Tawhidic side much more. Initially, I wrote a paper, and this paper was called An Overview of Western Philosophy, Research Paradigms, and the Islamization of Knowledge. And Prof. Khaliq saw that paper, and he called me and said, I would like you to talk about Islamization of knowledge in this conference. So my intention is to very briefly talk about Western philosophy and research paradigms, just to give some background, but then the majority of the topic will be on Islamization of knowledge. And as Prof. Khaliq kind of gave me the clue to talk more about the practical implication, inshallah, that's where I will focus. So in 2018, I wrote a little article that kind of looked at the overview of Western philosophy. And the reason I wrote this article is because I was trying to understand what was the philosophical underpinning of Islamic management. And my initial idea was I would have to study Western philosophy, and then I would have to study Islamic philosophy or Muslim philosophy, and then kind of come up with a critique. It was a very interesting experience because after studying a little bit of Western philosophy, I realized that Western philosophy contradicts itself. So actually, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We just have to understand what the Westerners have written. So Westerners is really basically English speaking, what they have written about philosophy, and then the contradictions become very apparent. Now, one of the issues that we have in our PhD program is we have a lot of PhD students who don't know much about philosophy, but in their chapter 3, when they talk about the philosophy underpinning their research, they will always talk about positivism, which is really anti-Islamic as a philosophy. So recently, I wrote another paper, which is basically similar to the first one, a little bit more detailed, but I look at the reasons why there's a big problem with positivism. And then at the end of the paper, I just started talking a little bit about Islamization of knowledge, even though that was not the main focus of the paper. This is just if anybody's interested. Plato, you cannot never run away from Plato in the Western philosophy. Aristotle is about empirical. But the really important person is actually Nietzsche, because he basically said, look, the truth doesn't matter in the West. It's just about power. And he's kind of one of the 4 founders of what will afterwards become known as postmodernism. The other thinker that I kind of started rediscovering is Karl Marx. So Karl Marx often gets confused with communism. Actually, Karl Marx did not talk much about communism. What he was doing is really a critic of capitalism. So if you read Karl Marx from that perspective, without getting involved in the communist idea, he's actually a very interesting person to read. There was this kind of the key table in my paper. And so I essentially was trying to show that Muslim students who are doing PhD, especially in management, should never, ever, ever say positivism is a good thing. We really endorse critical realism, even though it's not a perfect fit with our philosophy, but it's close enough. And then in the area of ontology, there is this idea of unintended consequences. And that's where I think this is going to be whatever small contribution I can make to Islamization of knowledge. This is where it gets interesting. So essentially, the Western paradigm has been very, very influenced by what you can say is a very mechanical view of the world. And it's always about cause and effect, and the idea that cause and effect should be very predictable. So A leads to B. Okay. This is quite an old way of looking at things. And in the 20th century, especially after the Second World War, a lot of people realized it's not that simple. And very often, whenever we do things, especially in the social world, there are unintended consequences. So people assume A leads to B, which is true, but they forget that there's C, D, E, and F that happens, which they hadn't thought about. So the reality is the world is so complex that to assume that you can establish causal effects without any unintended consequences is very naive. And so that's kind of one of the things I want to explore in this section. Now, when I did a little bit of a literature review on the Islamization of knowledge, it became very clear that there are many different opinions about what actually Islamization of knowledge really is. And I do not have any firm ideas on this issue, but I think this quote is really quite interesting. It's a debate. It's an ongoing debate. It hasn't been settled, but we are kind of trying to settle it. In my literature review, so it's a little bit embarrassing, my name actually appears on this paper, but most of the work was done by a former colleague of ours, Dr. Kapur Oziev. He was a member of the Kuliya of Economics for quite a long time. He's now, I think, somewhere in Central Asia. And he wrote a paper, and I contributed maybe 10%. And in the beginning of the paper, so he was focused on Islamic economics. He was making the point that there are three groups of scholars who talks about Islamic economics. Some have got a strong background in economics, but actually they do not know much about Islam. But they use, I would call it Arabic terminology. So, okay, you can argue they're trying. There's a second group of scholars who have got a very strong background in terms of Islamic law in particular, but they maybe don't have much founding in economics. So they end up writing papers which actually are quite naive from an economic point of view. And then the third group is really people who understand both the economics and the Islamic aspect quite well. Now, on a side note, this is just a personal opinion, but I think it shows that we need interdisciplinary cooperation. It is very difficult for someone to be experts in two different fields at the same time. So it seems obvious to me that we need people who are experts on the Islamic side working with people who are experts on the management or stroke economic side, and together they do research together, so there's cross-fertilization, so to speak. And so I want to explain a little bit about this idea of unintended consequences. Obviously, it's a very, very simple explanation, but what I hope will happen is this term unintended consequences will start appearing in the literature when scholars write about Islamization of knowledge. And maybe some of the terminology that I introduced today will start to be used, and that may lead to future thesis, PhDs, masters, whatever, related to Islamization of knowledge. So here, anytime I try to explain words, I go to Google Images and I look for a picture, right? They say that a picture says 1,000 words. I'm not sure if this is the best picture, but the idea is there's a domino effect. Okay, so typically, as I said, you expect B to happen, and it does happen, but there's also all kinds of unintended consequences that you just did not think about. Okay. Now, one of the areas of management where this has been developed in a lot of detail is an area called systems thinking, which is an area that I've been quite interested in. And there are a number of concepts which kind of form the core of this discipline. So if you think about physics, you will have electrons, you will have protons, you will have neutrons. So once you understand these different concepts, then you understand how physics works. This is similar in systems thinking. There's a few basic patterns. Once you know these patterns, then you can observe how this applies in the real world. So one of the patterns is called a balancing loop. And so again, I picked this picture from Google Image. And balancing loops is basically, there's a limit to everything. Okay, so the typical example that is in the literature is the thermostat. So when you have actually that wouldn't work in Malaysia. It's more the aircon system, right? So once you have the temperature that drops, then the aircon stops. And then if the temperature goes above a certain idea, then the aircon starts again, right? Basically, that's the idea. But everything has got a limit. So for example, the idea of petrol, right? For many, many years, we say, oh, we can just dig petrol and there will always be petrol. We will always find petrol. But logically, that's not possible, right? Same thing with forests. Okay, you start cutting down trees, you start, having a lot of land for agriculture. But after a while, you realize that you can't do that indefinitely. There's always a limit to any system. The other pattern, which is very common, is reinforcing loops. So here I just give the idea of a population. So the more children are born, the more the population increases. But in business, for example, if you want to increase your sales, what do you do? Well, maybe you have to hire another salesperson. If you want to increase your sales more, you have a second salesperson. And the more sales people you have, the more you're going to sell. At least it's not as simple as that, but you get the idea. The third thing is, and this is really, really important to understand, is there's generally a delay between cause and effect, right? So sometimes we implement policies and then we don't see any negative effects until maybe 5 years, 10 years, 15 years later. And when we see the negative effects 10, 15 years later, we think, why did we ever do this? It was such a silly thing to do. But at the time, 15 years ago, nobody was aware of the negative effects of that policy. So one of the problems we have with managing complex things is because there is a delay between cause and effect, it becomes very, very difficult to understand what is the right policy to do, because the long-term effects tend to be negative. And sometimes it's very difficult to correct policies because, giving an example, you have a new CEO who comes and takes position. He wants to fix things in the organization. He changes policy, and then his policy doesn't have time to take effect yet. Another 3 years later, another CEO comes and changes everything. Actually, the first CEO had the right policy. It's just you didn't have the patience to wait until you see the outcome. Okay, so systems are basically a combination of lots of reinforcing loops, lots of balancing loops, delays everywhere. If you see a complex system, it looks like a mess. But if you understand a little bit of systems thinking, you can see, okay, this is what's going on here, this is what's going on here, this is what's going on there. Now, Prof. Khalik was hinting at what are the practical implications. Imagine that every single problem that exists in the Muslim world can be put on a computer model using these kinds of reinforcing loop, balancing loop delays. Once you create the simulation using historical data, then you can run the simulations in order to learn how effective the model can be, right? So for example, I was thinking, while I was driving, I was thinking of the problem in Malaysia, the tensions between ethnic groups. It's actually very easy to, well, not very easy, but it's not that difficult to create simulations. And then you start running scenarios, and then you see what is the best scenario for everybody, so that you create a win-win situation for everybody. The good thing about this is if this is applied to Islamization of knowledge, then we can put into the system Islamic concepts. So for example, you want economic growth, you don't want riba. you can put that into the system. You can simulate that. You might find in the short term, your growth is going to be less. But in the long term, the positive effects on the society will be more. You can quantify that. When you quantify that, you can show this to, for example, let's say the prime minister, right? So you're not just simply providing words, you're actually providing a system that is scientifically sound, that reflects also the Islamic paradigm, and that is data-driven. Okay. Now, like always, at the beginning, people are very skeptical. So you're not going to start with a very big project. You start with a pilot, right? And then you do a small project. Some people at the ministry will start to say, oh, actually, this works. It gives us more ideas of how to manage the country in a good way. And as you establish your credibility, then you do slightly bigger projects, as people become more comfortable with this kind of approach, then obviously you can spread that. At the same time, you're reminding people, we're not just interested in Islamic management. We're not just interested in management. We're also interested in the Islamization of knowledge, right? So it's combining the management with the Islamization of knowledge together and bringing that. This is something I've always wanted to do at IIUM, but I didn't have the budget, basically because most of this work has been done in the United States with the MIT, and I don't have any contacts with the MIT, so it didn't work. But I've written about it, inshallah. Now, as an exercise, I've wondered, how would this work with the life of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam? Because we're all familiar with the life of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, so it's kind of a easy example for people who don't have any technical background to grasp the importance of this. So I started writing down some of the events in the life of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. I'm sure you know all of these. I actually started with the da'wah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and then I realized I made a mistake. I need to start with the year of the elephant, right? Because this is the event that persuaded a lot of the Arabs who were not Qurayshi that there was something special about Mecca, that the haram was really protected by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam started to preach, and the Quraysh started by insulting the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and then trying to harm the Muslims. And this only increased the determination of the Muslims. And really, there's no doubt that two very important events in the early Sirah is the conversion of Hamza and Omar al-Khattab. And the Quraysh just increased their insults. So when you see people increasing, that's a reinforcing loop. Okay. Then the Prophet ﷺ was forced to do hijrah. So this is the funny thing. If the Quraysh did not insult the Prophet ﷺ and did not threaten to or didn't plan to murder him, assassinate him, he would not have left hijrah. He would not have left Mecca. He would have continued to do da'wah in Mecca. So they thought that they would solve the problem by murdering him, right? So the unintended consequences, he has to make the hijrah, he creates the Islamic State in Medina, and then everything happens after that like a domino effect. So the first battle, the Battle of Badr, is 1,000 soldiers from the Meccan side. The Muslims are, of course, only 300. So, and of course, it doesn't solve the problem, but it just escalates things. So escalation is a typical systems thinking pattern. So you have the Battle of Uhud, which is, of course, the numbers of the Qurayshi have multiplied by 3. Then you have the Battle of Ahzab. And again, the unintended consequences. So I'm not sure how familiar everybody is with the Sirah. I assume that everybody does have a basic knowledge. But essentially, the Quraysh went to all the tribes and said, hey, if you come with us, we will destroy Medina. And so for all the tribes, they had a lot of faith in the credibility of the Meccans, because this was Mecca, you know, they were the power in the region for so long. And they thought it was easy money. It was a humiliation for them. They lost a lot of time, a lot of people. Actually, they didn't lose any people, but they wasted a lot of money. The unintended consequences, the credibility of the Quraysh was destroyed. Then the Prophet ﷺ decided to go for Hajj. So this one I have to check whether it was Hajj or Umrah. I'm never sure, because different people say different things. So I need to check about this. But anyway, they try to murder the Prophet ﷺ before he reaches Mecca. That doesn't work. So they have to compromise. There's the Treaty of Hudaybiyah. And this is a very interesting event, because all the Muslims thought this was a terrible treaty. They couldn't see what was the benefit, because all the conditions seemed to be so humiliating. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed Surah 48 and said, this is the clearest victory. And that's when the Muslims realized, wow, we don't know what happened, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told it is a clear victory, so it is a clear victory. Later on, when the stories unfold, okay, yes, now we understand this lead to this, you know, the link between cause and effect becomes easier to understand with hindsight. And the liberation of Mecca without a fight. And for me, this is the most amazing. Like if you read the Sirah of the Prophet ﷺ, what he did was so amazing. He instructed the Muslims to light so many fires so that the Meccans thought that this army was so huge. It was, of course, but he wanted to basically go for psychological warfare. And the Meccans just surrendered without a fight. Just this idea of, I want to conquer Mecca, but I don't want to kill anybody. Or I want to kill as few people as possible. That is amazing. For me, it's like, when you read that, I've never seen anybody do that in history. But of course, one of the consequences of liberating Mecca that way is all the tribes of Arabia were waiting to see who was going to win. And when they saw the Prophet ﷺ enter Mecca, clean up the Kaaba, for them it was very clear, because everybody remembered the year of the elephant. So it was a clear victory, and everything after that. Now, this is a very narrative version of the Sirah of the Prophet ﷺ. I'm going to show you 2 slides. One reflects a very traditional way of looking at things. The other reflects a more systems thinking approach. Okay, so this is a straight line, right? And this is how a lot of managers think, right? In other words, they will tell you, for example, this year, I want you to increase your sales by 10%. Next year, I want you to increase your sales by 10%. The year after that, so it's like, that's how they think. Just plus 10%, give me plus 10% every year. Is this what happened during the lifetime of the Prophet ﷺ? No. If you read the Sirah, the first few years of the dawah of the Prophet ﷺ, it was literally like a handful of people coming in. 5 people, 10 people, 15 people. maybe the next year, 30, 40. It was a very slow progression in terms of the number. The first 13 years of the dawah, the numbers are so small. It's quite incredible. And then it starts to explode. It goes like this. The only graph that or the only kind of system that reflects this kind of a data is basically, this is a reinforcing loop, right? This is systems thinking. So in other words, the challenge of IOK is not simply to represent the Islamic perspective, but also to show a version of reality that fits the reality that we see around us. Now, the challenge with systems thinking is there are a number of schools of management, okay? So we are all familiar with the idea of a mazhab, okay? In management, there's also different mazhabs, okay? There's actually, depending on how you count them, either 11, 12 different mazhabs. This is the least popular one. This is probably the most technical one. So if you go to a bookstore, you will never, or you will very rarely see a book on systems thinking. But in terms of reflecting reality, this is probably the one that is the most accurate. Now, the interesting thing is that there are a number of Muslims who are very, very strong in this area. And most of them are in the United States. So we can do something with that. But anyway, my hope with this short presentation is to kind of put the seed in your mind that when we are thinking about the Islamization of knowledge, we should start thinking about unintended consequences, balancing loop, reinforcing loop delays. That's maybe extra on the cake, but really the sad thing for me is so many of our policies in the Muslim world do not work because we do not try to anticipate the unintended consequences of the policies, right? I remember I did an MBA program. I was doing an MBA course on strategy, and the majority of my students were actually from Sudan on that particular event. And I kind of dedicated the whole semester just to exploring systems thinking and the implication for strategy. And I was quite surprised at the end. One of my students said to me, the only thing we're missing in Sudan is systems thinking. And when he said that, I was like, wow, I didn't think about it that way. So Allah, inshallah, yeah, I am.
Thank you, Dr. Fontaine. Give a round of applause to him to look into the idea. And I, as in control, I have decided that we have both the speakers finish their presentation, then I open for Q&A. I realize when you challenge the positivism and Dr. Hisham started moving around, and there is a question also from Prof. Suhaimi talking about. So thank you for introducing the system thinking. In fact, even management, we got so many issues. So I don't want to waste your time for that. Let Dr. Fontaine answer this later on. We wrote both together a book on strategic management from Islamic perspective, which was published by John Wiley. And that book here in Malaysia, hardly people use it. It is recommended in the Durham Business School. They use case studies actually. So without further ado, I think now there are already questions in the chat room. But before that, I would like to invite our second speaker, Sister Safia Sabreen. Safia, are you connected? I can see your name here. Sister Safia actually is her full name is Safia Sabreen, is an Islamic philosopher, researcher, and mechanical engineer with a unique focus on the field of Islam and science. She holds a master's in philosophy and is currently pursuing a PhD, what is called quantum physics, consciousness, and fine-tuned inverse blah, blah, blah. Safia is the director of the Second Golden Age, a groundbreaking multimedia project that revisits the Muslim scientific revolution inspired by Quran and explores ways to inspire a contemporary revival. She also served as assistant professor at Cluster University in India, her work, etc. So I think it will take some time, Sister Safia, and it will go to all your account. So I would rather stop here and I hand over the floor to you. Do you mind to unmute and proceed?
Yes, thank you, sir.
Okay, Safia, go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. It's such an honor. It's such a pleasure to be there with such senior scholars, role models, and I'm so grateful for this opportunity. So I'm going to share my screen. Please allow me to share my screen. Yes.
Yes, Safia, we can see your screen. You can proceed.
Yes, thank you so much. Yeah. Auzubillahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Alhamdulillahi rabbil alamin. Assalatu wassalam ala rasulihil kareem. So I'm going to be discussing the subject of robotics, artificial intelligence, and artificial life generation in the Islamic scientific heritage. And then the implication of knowing this, the implications of this for the Islamization of knowledge in general and science in particular. So the agenda of my discussion is going to be as follows. Firstly, a little bit on the developments in robotics as a science in the Islamic Golden Age and the development of programmable devices that happened during that time. I like to call it the Islamic scientific revolution because that's what it really was. And the start of the algorithmic style of reasoning and computational devices. We're going to go into what exactly does it mean to have this algorithmic style of reasoning. What was before this, what was after these developments, and the great difference between them. And then Jabir bin Hayyan's theory of artificial life. I think this is one of the most, fascinating theories that came out of the Islamic Golden Age and the Islamic scientific revolution. This idea of creating life in the environment of a laboratory. And the Islamization of knowledge, then I'm going to basically take all of these developments that took place and analyze them from the lens of the Islamization of knowledge. How can we integrate this concept of Islamization into these fields? Because they're so relevant to our time today. And finally, then I'm going to end with the social, the religious, and the economic implications for the Islamization of these technologies, how it's so important that we actually move ahead and produce practical solutions for the Islamization of these cutting-edge, groundbreaking technologies that have taken over our world, I'd say. So before I start, it has to be known for scholars that science as we know it, as we know it as an empirical, objective discipline, it owes its existence to Arabic culture. This is said by Robert Briffaut, who was a very well-known historian, and his book is very famous. But he says he says that science owes its very existence to Arabic culture. I'd disagree with him. I'd say it was the Islamic Tawhidic culture. It wasn't just Arabic culture, but we get his point. He says the ancient world was pre-scientific. What we call science arose in Europe as a result of a new spirit of inquiry, unknown to the Greeks. The spirit and those methods were introduced into the European world by the Arabs. So he's right in his observations, but obviously it was much larger than the Arabs. It had many other ethnicities as well. And it was the Tawhidic view on the world that actually revolutionized firstly the Islamic world and then Europe. So moving on, the first topic that I would discuss is robotics and programmable devices that were created in the Islamic scientific revolution. So I'm going to go to a very interesting figure from the 11th and the 12th century in the Muslim world, Al-Jazari, who was a well-known mechanical engineer of that time. And he is known as the father of robotics because of what all he created and the fascinating book that he wrote on robotics. So he has been credited with creating the first programmable humanoid robot. As you can see on the right side of the slide, that was his drawing from his original text, where he shows how he can create, and he did create, a sort of a robot serving beverage. And below the page, he actually gave the mechanism of how the arm would move, what the mechanism would be, how the beverage actually would pass through the arm into the glass. And he created many fundamental other mechanical inventions, automata such as automated hand-washing devices, and even a boat with 4 automated musicians. I'm going to show you that. And especially it was his book in the 1206, what he wrote, the Book of Knowledge of Ingenious Mechanical Devices, which is we still have that, and it has been completely translated. It's one of the most comprehensive and qualified compilations of robotics and automated devices till date. That's some of his inventions. We have to understand these are extremely, even though they look very artistic, but this requires a lot of engineering skill to make something like that. So that was a boat that would move on its own just by means of water pressure and have instruments playing on its own. All the instruments would literally play on their own using water, hydraulic, and air pressure. And Al-Jazari is also known for his historic invention of the crankshaft. So all of our automobiles and many other machines actually run through the crankshaft. This idea of translating rotary or circular motion into linear or straight motion, or vice versa, that's done by the crankshaft. It was Al-Jazari who did that. I mean, till a few decades, we knew that this invention took place in the 15th century in Europe, but that's wrong. It was Al-Jazari who created this mechanism. And the first programmable machine in the history of engineering was created by Banu Musa brothers, who were very famous engineers and mathematicians from the court of the Abbasid Khalifa in the House of Wisdom, Bait al-Hikmah in Baghdad. And they created this extremely complicated design of a self-playing flute. This is a self-playing musical instrument. Just by means of using water pressure, they could create something like this. And here they actually give, they didn't just create mechanisms and instruments, they actually gave complete instructions on how to recreate them, the full procedure behind the invention. And that's why we can actually, there's so many museums around the world that are recreating these technologies. And he writes, one of the Banu Musa brothers who created this mechanism shows that how this can all of this mechanism basically can be put in the body of a robot, and it would seem as if, the flute is being played, but behind it would be all of this sophisticated mechanism. So basically what I'm trying to show you is that the medieval age was the age of innovation, and the innovation, the kind of which we have today. This is extremely sophisticated engineering. This is not some primitive engineering. Moving on to Islamic algorithms and artificial intelligence. In 833, Al-Khwarizmi, the very famous mathematician, who's also known as the father of algebra, and the term algorithms comes from his name. Al-Khwarizmi became Al-Khwarizmi in Latin, and then algorithms came from that. He wrote the most famous text detailing solutions to linear and quadratic equations. And these equations we use all the time in our life, whether in business transactions, in engineering, to know the speed of vehicles, to know the trajectory of missiles, designing satellites. We use all of these equations in daily life. But what he actually, his main, contribution to the history of mathematics and to the history of artificial intelligence is giving the shape to this algorithmic method of mathematics. He created this method of solving problems and creating outputs, which is the algorithmic method. And basically, it's a procedure which breaks down complex problems into sequences of simpler operational steps to transform an input into an output. So you have a set of input instructions, then you have a sort of a formula or an algorithm, a processing procedure takes place, and that produces the output. Now, what is important to be known, that by the way is a page from his original text, which was called Kitab al-Jabr, from which we get algebra. And now what's interesting to note is that the mechanism behind artificial intelligence still today is just the same. It's just the use of these algorithms, breaking down complex problems into simpler ones using a method or an algorithm of processing to produce output. And all throughout our daily life, we're interacting with different kinds of AI, like facial recognition. You enter a mall and there's a machine to recognize your face, or autocorrect that we use whenever we are writing an essay or anything. Search engines like Google, Microsoft, or social media algorithms that we have. Many a times you're on social media and you checked an ad, and then tomorrow, day after, the same ad keeps on popping up. That's algorithm that recognizes your patterns. So all of this is basically a sophisticated form of what Al-Khwarizmi actually created. The most easiest way algorithm that is used in artificial intelligence is called supervised machine learning, which is nothing but giving instructions to the machine that the picture of the elephant is called the elephant. So whenever you notice the picture of the gray animal, that is the elephant, and that is supervised machine learning. You're not really teaching it. The word used is wrong. It's not really learning it. You're not really teaching it, because that's a machine. But what is happening is you're connecting these two things, an image with a name, and that requires algorithms, steps, and procedures just directly derived from the text of Al-Khwarizmi. And on the right side, you can see a device that's the astrolabe, which used to be used in the medieval ages to navigate for navigation. Basically, you're out in the open, you want to navigate either on land or sea, to know the time of the day or night, to know the position of stars and seasons as well. So this is the earliest, you could say, the earliest form of a computational device. You put in a few inputs there, the position of a particular star or position of a particular landmark, and then you turn the dial and then you get an output. So these were forms of artificial, I wouldn't say artificial, but forms of computational devices. Moving on, then we have the Islamic theory of artificial life generation, something which is extremely considered controversial today. So I want to introduce you to Jabir bin Hayyan, a very famous figure from the early period of the Islamic scientific revolution. He's known as the father of experimental chemistry. Chemistry before him was more so, to do with alchemy and magic and lots of superstitious stuff. Jabir bin Hayyan put emphasis on practical work and conducting experiments. So he is the father of experimental chemistry. And as Will Durant, the historian, also agrees, that as a science, chemistry was almost created by the Muslims. Before this, it just existed as vague hypothesis. So among all the chemists, Jabir bin Hayyan stands out the tallest. And there's no other work. Paul Krauss, who's very famous for his work on Jabir bin Hayyan, he says, there's no alchemical work of Islam that reveals such vast knowledge of ancient literature or has such encyclopedic character than Jabir's work. So he's just a brilliant polymath. And all of what he wrote, basically, those kind of technologies are still in use. So he perfected the process of distillation, which is still in use. And it is still, the same equipment that is used in industries around the world to distill crude petroleum into petrol and diesel and gas and naphtha and all of that. It's the same mechanism. There hasn't been much of a change in that. And what I find really interesting about Jabir bin Hayyan is that his spiritual figure and his teacher was Imam Jafar as-Sadiq, who is the sixth great-grandson of the Prophet ﷺ. And Jabir bin Hayyan literally gives so much credit to Imam Jafar as-Sadiq, even for his scientific work. I find that really interesting. Moving on now, just to understand how he got to his theory of artificial life, we have to understand his philosophy of science, or his what he calls the theory of balance, or the theory of mizan. And there, it'll be very interesting for all the scholars, there to see that he actually uses what we now call the Tawhidic principle. He doesn't call it Tawhidic at that time, but we can recognize the Tawhidic element in his philosophy of science. He says that all things fall under the principle of balance. And it is by means of this principle that man is able to make sense of the world. So he says, basically, there's a unity behind all of this diversity, and there's a balance, an equilibrium that governs everything in the world. And he says this is the way, basically, if you take this idea of the world, that there is a balance, this is the way through which one understood and made sense of, and above all, measured and manipulated the objects and the processes of the universe. So even today in science, we have the concept of the uniformity of laws. You have to assume that laws work the same in Malaysia, in India, in outer space. You have to assume that. So this is a sort of a variant of Jabir bin Hayyan's theory of balance. And he says that this is the supreme principle, the Qaida Uzma of the world, which governs everything. And by this method, we can know everything. So if he says this, the next necessary conclusion of a theory like this is that he says that as time progresses and humans attain increased control and knowledge of this cosmic balance, this mizan, and this precise quantitative structure of the universe, this will allow them to synthetically create things that are naturally found in the world, from inanimate minerals, objects, to animate life, leading up to artificial creation of human life. And which is extremely fascinating how he would say this in the 9th century. So he's saying there is this balance, and as time progresses, humans will understand this balance. They will manipulate it, and whatever nature creates, they will try to replicate it, starting from inanimate minerals and objects, going to animate life, and then even to the creation of human life. But there's a difference between us and what we would create. He says, okay, before that, it's important to note that all of this is written in his book of stones, the Kitab al-Ahjar, where he discusses the possibility of creating scorpions, snakes, and even humans in the right laboratory environment. And in his book, Al-Mizan al-Sagir, he writes there are two sorts of creation, a first and a second. The first is divine creation. So that's what God created. The second is represented by imitation, and it resembles the first. This is what man creates. And the difference between divine creation and artificial generation is that the first creation is instantaneous. It doesn't require time. It doesn't require knowledge accumulation. It's just instantaneous. Whereas human beings require generations and generations of knowledge, and human beings and human effort. That's the difference. So he distinguishes between the two. And finally, what Jabir bin Hayyan, he considers this theory of artificial life, which he calls takween. As we know in Arabic, the word kaun means creation, to be, to come into being. So takween is the process of creation. He considers takween to be a source of seeking Allah's nearness through understanding his creation. So for him, this is a form of ibadah, where you are actually emulating, or you are following the attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, of creation, of being the Khalifatullah on earth, by using the creation of Allah to create things and to create other things and to understand the balance that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has put in the universe. And what is interesting is Imam Jafar as-Sadiq, who is his teacher, and Jabir bin Hayyan insist that this knowledge is extremely powerful. Therefore, it must not reach the uninitiated in spirituality. And that is so true. They were right in the 9th century. They knew that this is extremely powerful knowledge. If it goes into the hands of people who are not spiritually pure, it's going to create fitna, and that's what we see in the world today. But what's important to note is that in the history of AI, we usually start from 1943. If we study the history of AI, we are given a very Western view of the history of AI starting from 1943, whereas what should be actually included is the contributions of the medieval Muslim precursors who created the algorithmic style, who created theories of artificial intelligence, artificial life generation, that are precursors to genetic engineering, synthetic biology. And the same works for the history of genetic engineering as well. If you go and buy books on the history of genetic engineering, you actually see the huge gap that they've left from 30,000 BCE to 7,800 BCE. That's before Christ, and then a huge jump to 1973. What happened between this? That's not mentioned, but this is the kind of the narrative that needs to be changed, and Muslim contributions have to be recognized. Now, finally, the last part of my presentation that deals with basically how can we appreciate these amazing developments and how can we actually use them for our project of the Islamization of knowledge. So I'm going to take the two-step procedure that has been suggested, written by Dr. Sayyid Naqib al-Attas. He, in his book, Islam and Secularism, he says step number 1 is the isolation of Western harmful elements of knowledge. What has to be done is that we need scholars who are well aware of Western philosophy and the Western epistemic elements that control knowledge production. So we need to isolate that from knowledge. Then this step number 2 is the infusion of Islamic key concepts, Islamic ethics and Islamic key concepts, which would be Tawheed, obviously, and the ethics of Islam. And only then would we have created true knowledge. Right now, knowledge is in the form of a corrupted state, but we can make it into true knowledge by this two-step procedure. Those are pages from his book, Islam and Secularism. What are the dangers at hand if we don't do this? I really want us to understand that this is not just a nice, feel-good project that we have, Islamization of science. It just sounds so good. But we have to understand the dangers that are imminent if knowledge is not Islamized. And in 9th century, Imam Jafar as-Sadiq and Jabir bin Hayyan are saying that this is powerful knowledge. This should not go into the hands of wrong people. This has gone into the hands of wrong and corrupt people. And we still are not taking the effort to Islamize it. The problem is ours. So the dangers are extremely, extremely big. Number 1 is the widespread propaganda that has been disseminated that humans like God can create a new race of human beings. They can pose serious challenges to faith and religious experience. So you kind of, get this message from all of the literature that has been written on artificial intelligence, synthetic biology, is that, you don't need God. We are creating humans. We are creating life in the lab. Why do we need God? And mostly you'll see atheist scientists taking up this narrative. But then we don't, we are not engaging them in the actual way we need to be engaged. We need to understand what is being created. There is a difference between what we are creating and how we exist as human beings. Number 2 is the use of AI to compromise privacy. That is also a very big challenge. And Islamization would actually address that challenge in the best way. AI in weapons to kill faster and better. In fact, artificial intelligence is actually, has the greatest application, unfortunately, today in the worst of industries. There has been so much news about it being used as experiments in Ukraine, in Gaza, in all of these places. So these are challenges that Muslim scientists, Muslim philosophers and thinkers need to address. And finally, AI to compromise politics of countries. AI is even used to, change and influence results of elections and politics, and so much information is at the risk of being, changed. Okay, finally.
Safiya, how many more slides to go? Can you take
Just three more.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm almost finishing up, sir. So finally, I will go to the last section, and which is for just to make this this subject become more and more familiar and be at home for all of us. We have to understand even the Prophet ﷺ informed us of the rise of this intelligent technology, and when he talked about the hadith of Dajjal, before this, the hadith about the talking inanimate objects like shoes, handheld devices communicating. He said in Jami' Tirmidhi, the tip of a person's whip, the straps on his sandals speak to him, and his thigh informs him of what occurred with his family. We usually keep our phones in our, pockets, and trees will speak, he said, in the last age. He talked about reproductive technologies. Many scholars talk about this mutawatir hadith. The maid servant will give birth to her mistress to mean surrogacy. And there are others where he talks about possibly gene editing, where the hadith of Dajjal and the animals during that time will have bulky bodies. So pasturing animals would come to them with their humps very high, their udders full of milk, and their flanks stretched, something that can be achieved only via genetic engineering. Now, it has to be understood, the associate professor before me, he explained it very well, and I will just reiterate that the Western philosophical framework that underlies all of the knowledge production process is also obviously underlying artificial intelligence and genetic engineering. So it's utilitarian, it is hedonistic, it is materialistic. And these technologies, if you notice, they only serve colonial, hegemonic motives in their current form. So all of this has to be revised, all of this has to be removed in the process of Islamization. And what would be the implications finally? They would be firstly social implications. Imagine AI and genetic engineering. These would be used to promote maqasid al-sharia and the promotion of human welfare and holistic prosperity. Imagine the use of AI to lift economically challenged masses out of poverty. They talk about AI replacing human beings and, so many people being, taken out of their jobs, but we haven't even used AI where it needs to be used. Then there's philosophical religious implications of Islamization, that we would use it to understand human consciousness, which is one of the biggest mysteries in science in the world today. And we would use it to even decode the two revelations. The two-book theory that we have is that the world and the Quran are the two revelations of Allah. We could use it to understand the structure, the order, and the complementarity of both. The common signature of God that exists both in the universe and in the Quran. We could use that, and we could use this to boost the global halal industry. And finally, imagine the commercial and the economic implications of the Islamization of these technologies. Technology obviously is power. So whoever produces better tech rules the world. The use of AI to boost national economy, decrease imports, increase exports. In a country like Malaysia, imagine the benefits something like this would have. And the use of genetic engineering to improve healthcare, to end gain-of-function research, which is basically to create viruses and this and that. Islamic view on genetic engineering would be to create cures, not diseases. So with that, finally, I would remind myself and everyone in the gathering that Islamization of knowledge is an Islamic obligation. It's fard. It is a prophetic sunnah. It is a Quranic command. It is the road to Jannah. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity.
Thank you, sister. MashaAllah. We call Ism ba Musamma. Safia, and Sabira, and then Saeed, mashallah. All these good combinations are attached to your nomenclature. Alhamdulillah. So we, brothers and sisters, you have the food for thought. And now there is a food for the stomach as well. So any one of you want to grab, please take it. And then we start now the session for the Q&A. Very interesting topics today here. That's why I always have the concern in my mind. Each discipline got their own challenges. And when we bring the philosophy, its applications actually goes to quite, I would say, challenging in a way that how to get the main thing, the philosophy, into the real life. So now I have come to the realization that so far we have heard, and for last 40 years of existence of IIUM, I'm hearing IOK, or Islamization of knowledge. And then it goes to the ground, and then we start getting the twists. Some start talking about, oh, we should talk the harmonization of the law, because Sharia law and then the civil law. Then people, they will start talking about integration of knowledge. And then we have the social sciences people, they don't agree with many theories. And then they will say, no, we should have a sort of relevantization of these. All those kind of things are quite confusing. So I thought it's better to go down one level to see applications. And Alhamdulillah, we started this session. So this two competent, one in management area, organizational theories and etc. We have Dr. Fontaine in front of you. I can see there's a lot of questions in the chat room. And we have Sister Safia, who spoke very, clearly about the situation, or do or die. If you won't do, it falls in the hands of the wrong people. You can't stop the destruction of the world. So are we ready? And she challenges us, take it as a fardhi kifaya with a pinch of salt. So please feel free. Our practice is, of course, that's not wajib, but our practice is we give the chance to the people here face to face first. So, but make sure that you have time left also for to answer the questions which have been put in the chat box. So who wants to take first? Maria. Okay, now we have Latin American mindset asking about this. So Sister Maria, I think most of you know. She is from Peru. And okay, you want to go first? Who want to go second? First round, we want to. Dato is there. Okay. Second, third question. I just put in order. So, okay, two first. But your question to whom? You can either to, yeah, please mention to whom.
My question is to Professor. Sir, could you explain why is it that the science of economics didn't really have a breakthrough compared to other sciences? Why is it that we are still using old concepts since it was developed? And why is it like not really advancing with having new theories and breakthroughs in these times that have already changed a lot? Thank you.
Okay, alhamdulillah, bismillah. So I do not know much about economics because I'm on the management side. But what I do know is that there's actually a lot of very interesting work that has been done. A lot of it is very revolutionary, but it's a minority of scholars. So if you imagine a situation where 90% of economists are mainstream and 10% are the rebels, the rebels have got very interesting ideas. So the problem is actually, it's not so much that there's not a lot of research in or not a lot of breakthrough in economics, is that the interesting scholars in economics don't actually have a voice. And maybe that's one of our contribution as Muslim scholars, is we can go to these more rebellious economists and articulate their point of view compared to the standard economic text. As I said, I got interested a little bit in the work of Karl Marx. And I think Karl Marx is completely misunderstood. But don't look at him as the father of communism. Look at him as a critique of capitalism. And then it's a very interesting discussion.
Okay, so thank you. I think maybe if you are not happy with the answer after the adjourn, you can enjoy a coffee and discuss that. Yang berbahagia, Dato', your question is to Safia or to Dr. Fontaine?
I don't have a question.
Okay.
I have some random comments. Thank you to both speakers. I think you have made a very remarkable and enlightening perspective on the issues on Islamization of knowledge. My concern here is that Muslim scholars in Muslim universities must change their attitude toward knowledge and the academic disciplines. Because if we do not change our attitude toward knowledge and the academic disciplines, we will be forever territorial and obsessed with the boundaries of whatever we study. I think the process over the last 4 decades, in Malaysia at least, what I see is that the initiatives at Islamization of knowledge in the 80s are very much discipline bound. You find focusing on the sociology. Early on, it was psychology, political science, economics, and now management. I think that we need to see the totality of the knowledge production in science and human sciences, the social and human sciences, because you have a common epistemology. You have a common systems, a common basically common methodologies. But why break it up? Why fragment and bifurcate many of these things? Because we cannot see anything. So we have perhaps made an error in terms of our approach. That's one. Second is limits to knowledge. Okay? Some thinking is that if one wants to Islamize knowledge, then one would need to master the disciplines. It's impossible. And how much deeper can we master a particular discipline? For example, if you're an economist, how much deeper can you master economics or sociology, anthropology, or political science, or whatever, or history? So the point here is that I think I'm talking about the community of Muslim scholars, must look at the system of knowledge production and look at that disciplines do not descend from heaven. And we have to be bold enough to be engaged, not in the substantive depth of a particular discipline, which are actually false boundaries, but to be engaged with the principles and the fundamentals of these so-called disciplines. And because these disciplines, as we study now, they have not been around for ages. Many of these disciplines that you have mentioned, we're talking about modern academic disciplines, have been around for only about 300 years. We're talking about, say, the social sciences. I'm looking at the Chicago School, the 5 major social sciences: sociology, economics, anthropology, political science, psychology, and what else? The other one. 5. These emerge in the context of a crisis-driven Europe that has a problem with their God. Europe that has a problem with revealed knowledge. And it's a peculiar problem faced by Europe, but it has been universalized. And we have taken them lock, stock, and barrel. And we have trapped ourselves. So this is, I think we need to look into how we want to see, that there are no fixed boundaries as to knowledge.
Okay,
I want more, but anyway.
I think there are two parts that those concern raised. First, maybe Safia, you can answer it. Second, I think you answer first the limits to the knowledge that to have raised the issue just now. Is it okay?
Basically, I completely agree with Dato. One of the things that I've been very concerned about in management is a lot of the journals of management and a lot of, let's focus on the journals of management. They're basically profit-making operations. So it's not actually about spreading knowledge. It's about spreading knowledge in a way that we make money. And I actually had long conversations with editor, and they will tell you, oh, this kind of paper, they will not accept because they know this is not going to make that much money compared to other papers. And when he said that, I was completely shocked. And I realized I have no idea how journals actually work, but they're basically money-making operations. So I totally agree, and it's a very complex issue, but I'm glad that you raised the issue so that we are more aware of this, inshallah.
So Safia, Sister Safia, are you okay? Can you hear us?
Yes, sir, I can.
So that was asking about the first issue. Do you remember? You want him to repeat?
No, actually, I listened to all of his points and I completely agree with him. That is absolutely required. And yes, I don't have anything much to add because he's encompassed all of these things.
Can I just
very
mention
well.
one thing? You emphasize on systemic thinking, systems theory. It's a marvelous area, actually. It's a marvelous episteme. I delved into that in the 80s. And that was instrumental in many things that I'm learning now and I'm pursuing and expanding my boundaries. And when I studied it in 1984, it was offered. I was from Minnesota. I was taking political science, but it was offered in the School of Management. So I joined the management students. But that became instrumental in my further papers, my PhD. What we in the book, it was said that systems theory was founded by Ludwig von Bertalanffy, based on biology. But what our sister said, it actually can go to Jabir Al-Hayyan. He could be the father or the founder of systems theory. Because when I was looking to biology, it makes sense. I was rationalizing how and why it came out from biology. And Jabir Al-Hayyan studied biology as such, and he developed the idea of systems thinking. So again, these are things that but my comment on the sister is on the periodization. I think that we need to dismantle our thinking on the medieval age and the dark ages. There's no dark ages or medieval age in Islam. There's no golden age as such. These are Eurocentric, European exceptionalism on their superiority against the others. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I can see in the chat room, maybe those who are here in the hall, you can go after this if necessary. There is a comment actually coming from the Sumaira talking about the issue. With due respect, Dr. Fontaine, would you like to explain how positivism is un-Islamic? And while you have also used the part of it in your presentation that is cause and effects. And same thing now, Shiro's asking, positivity grows and develops in the presence of the negativity. Just to do a cross-reference definition of the two aspects. Dr. Prof, as usual, Prof. Soimi, he has a long question here. Dr. Fontaine, you mentioned that positivism in research is not Islamic. In research philosophy, I believe that revamping this will be challenging, especially considering that IIUM now in its 41st year has still not fully adopted the Turath methodology in the research. For the knowledge of our students, Turath is a source of Islamic knowledge. So I think the word makes it difficult for you. So Turat methodology in the research, lecturers, scholars, and students appear to be more comfortable with Western research philosophies. What would you suggest as immediate action to implement Islamic research philosophy in academic research? So I can see the word positivism has inspired a lot of reaction. Can you please?
Okay, so I don't think this is the right forum to have a long discussion on positivism because that will take another hour. But as I mentioned earlier, this is not a new issue. And there's actually a number of articles that have been written on this by different Muslim scholars. So I'm not inventing something new. I'm actually restating what is already in the literature. And there is a professor, I think, who's based in Pakistan, who wrote a number of articles that have been published in the International Journal of Economics, Management, and Accounting. And I was trying to remember the year. I think it's something like 2013, 2014. And I'm trying to remember his name, but I can't. But he wrote a very simple and nice paper where he looked at the history of positivism. And essentially, positivism arose in the 19th century, early 20th century. They were atheist scholars, and they basically argued, if you cannot see it, you cannot measure it. So they actually dismissed any religious values, any ethical values. They wanted pure science with no values at all attached to them. And that's where the debate started. I think the reason why I wrote my paper is I think a lot of our PhD students have kind of this idea that if you're doing quantitative studies, then you just put in the word positivism and that's enough. I think they don't know that aspect of positivism, which is as a rejection of all religious values. And so the alternative is critical realism. When I wrote the paper, which inshallah will be published soon, I wrote it with PhD students. So rather than writing the paper and then getting the feedback of PhD students, I wrote it. And as I was writing it, I was giving the draft to a group of PhD students in management, and they were giving me feedback and so on and so forth. So they were actually very interested in this. So kind of linking that to the discussion or to the question of Prof. Swaimi, I think we just start with our own PhD students, right? Because it's been published, we can give them as part of the either research methodology course or the different supervisors can give them as part of their literature review. But as much as possible, we have to understand the controversies that surround positivism. And I think there's one of the questions was about positivity versus negativity. And I wasn't sure whether that was a misunderstanding of the concept of positivism. So I'm not really sure how to answer that one. But okay. I agree with Prof. Swaimi in the sense that we just start with our own PhD students first. And don't worry about what happened in the past. We just move forward and we try to do as the best we can.
Thank you. I think
can I ask a question?
Now we have actually, I think we are towards the end of the almost. He didn't listen to the lecture. He just joined. So I
listened something, sir. I just wanted to.
You just joined. I think your question might not be that relevant to the presenters. If you want, can you pick? Otherwise, we can not long speech, Pro. Just short.
Just one quick. Yes, thank you very much, sir. I'm sorry that I was in prayer. I could not join the whole lecture, but the professor said about Marxism, that Marxism is most misunderstood religion, and it was against reaction against capitalism. But I think that the challenge which Marxism made against religion and the Islam and other values of religion how we can say that it was misunderstood by Muslims or by the scholars of Islam? So the reaction was genuine in that sense. So we can't say that Marxism was misunderstood by Muslims, although it was reaction against capitalism, but it was also against religion and the values of religion itself. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Prof. Marathi. Do you want to respond? Or
Prof,
anyone? Yeah.
can I just, it is on positivism.
Okay.
This is a very important thing, you see. Positivism arose in the 18th century when basically together with the kind of view of social science emulating social physics and so on. The problem it is the default knowledge that we're experiencing now. We have to, all Muslim scholars must be aware of that. Why positivism? Because the problem here is that positivism is the rejection of revealed knowledge.
Yeah. Correct.
Revealed knowledge began to be rejected by Europe in the 17th century. That's when we face this problem of Islamization now, because Islamization is a response toward the despiritualization of knowledge in that period. And as a result of that, emerged positivism.
Okay. I think maybe the most competent person to take a view of all these questions during the closing remarks, maybe Prof. Abdulaziz Barkut to conclude the session. So you got so many diverse views here, and please take your couple
Can I
of minutes
just
to conclude.
ask something first? Just as, because
Okay, quickly.
okay, because this
quickly.
positivism, if you cannot measure it, can't see it, it's not there. It's not relevant. Okay, when it comes to accounting, you have basically a zero-sum game. Some money goes here, some money is out from somewhere. Now, but in Islam, we have this concept where you give one, you receive back tenfold. And then there's also the concept of barakah. You do the right thing, you got risky from somewhere. I don't know how it fits into accounting. How does it fit into the whole idea of economics? You want to explain this concept of barakah and getting things tenfold when it is not, it doesn't make sense in terms of accounting. How do you answer that?
Very, very complicated issue. I think the most problem of corruption in economics is started from accountants. I can see.
For me, this is when you sit down and you think about it, there's a lot of problems with certain disciplines such as economics, accounting, management, and whatever. And very often, when you understand the theory, you realize that there are a lot of limitations to the theory. So it's not that the theory explains everything, but it's the best we can do at the moment. So if you're talking, for example, of reality, I think all of us has experiences times where things happens to us and we have barakah in our life. And if you try to explain to anybody logically, it's not possible. But we all have this experience. So there's no theory that can describe something like barakah and so on and so forth, but we actually do experience it every day. So this is, again, we have to acknowledge the limitation of some of our theories, and that's part of the Islamization of knowledge process.
This is actually where I said accountant, because many of my colleagues there back in the Kulia, they really sometimes don't lie. They are the one who actually infused this idea of the interest, riba, and everything, and the double interest system that they actually taught. Oh my God, I can tell you. So there is no way of thinking of introducing the barakah in the system when they start with the whole idea of corruption first. So the accounting system itself has created a lot of chain reaction. And now perhaps next time I invite an accountant to speak, then you put him. Prof, back to you now. Maybe would you like to take a couple of minutes to conclude the session? In the meantime, let us give a round of applause to the speakers, please.
Yeah, thank you very much indeed. I think it's really wonderful to have our two scholars from two different disciplines speaking about the reality of knowledge and the reality of the context of knowledge in which we live today and consume and internalize and apply and create impacts on ourselves, on our societies, on people. And as Professor Murad mentioned, and also our Professor Ridwan, yeah, I think the whole situation traces back to the Western model of civilization and how they articulated knowledge, philosophy, knowledge, and later on comes science and technology, give them power. Then they created the knowledge power, or the power of knowledge, from these philosophical perspectives, including positivism, existentialism, materialism, rationalism, empiricism, Freudianism, evolutionism, relativism. So that's what conditions our creation and conception of knowledge. Whether we understand it or not, that's the reality. In the last 150 years, knowledge is based on that. Whether you talk about management, or psychology, or social science, or biology, or neurology, or genetics, the philosophy behind it is all based on that philosophy. So the process of Islamization or Tawhidization is facing a very huge challenge. It's not a simple and easy process to do. It will consume centuries to reach another model that produces its products, like the products of the Western knowledge, which is science, technology, artificial intelligence, economics, management, governance. That's their dictionary. But your dictionary and the translation of that dictionary or philosophy or worldview into real science and knowledge, and this will take long time. If we are not patient and sabar, then will be very hard. We have just 40 years in this exercise. It will consume generations to bring back the new Islamic civilization with a model which can integrate knowledge. But anyway, I believe that what is important to understand at ISTAC or IIUM or in the universities which adopt this idea, the bottom line is the Quran. The bottom line is the revealed knowledge. And how you translate that revealed knowledge into epistemology, into philosophy, into guidance, into orientation. So, brothers and sisters, understanding the Islamic worldview is the key to all, because you cannot, now we are talking about this, what is Islamization? Islamization actually is deconstruction or deconstruct positivism and the brothers and sisters of deconstruction. But if you want to deconstruct, you need later to reconstruct and synthesize to create new knowledge. To reconstruct, you need a model. That's the Islamic worldview. So as long as our researchers, our scholars, our ummah, our ulama, our academicians cannot fluently and easily deal with the Islamic epistemology, with the Islamic worldview, and use it in different areas of life, whether you are a medical doctor or a management or social scientist, what you need is just that power or ability to use the Islamic worldview in your area. Then we will dismantle the idea of segmentation and compartmentalization of disciplines and this. Everybody should be empowered to use the Islamic epistemology, the Islamic worldview in his area. Then we can move from there, brothers and sisters. So It's really, we need also to teach our scholars, researchers to be able to deal with the Quran, to deal with the Sunnah. How do you deal with the principles of epistemology or ontology or existential or cosmology of the Quran? Are we able to do now? Our student here at ISTAC, for example, or in many other places, we cannot even, read strong texts of Ibn Khaldun or Al-Farabi or Al-Ghazali or Ibn Sina and really do a critical assessment or deal, let alone dealing with the Quran, understanding how the epistemology of the Quran functions, how system thinking, this is this Western concept, and this actually the Quran itself teaches you system or network thinking, how it relates between the universe, the soul, the mind, the ethics, the politics, the history, the ghaib. This doesn't teach you system thinking. I tell you, go see Al-Ghazali, how see the books of Al-Ghazali. You see a thinking, a mind, integrated mind thinking everywhere. Al-Shafi'i, Al-Farabi, Shatibi, who is considered on Usul al-Fiqh alim. If you read his book, Usul al-Muwafaqat fi Usul al-Sharia, talking about social science and human science. But I never seen our people of jurisprudence or our people who are doing fiqh telling that Shatibi is talking about social science and human science. How? Ibn Khaldun, علم العمران, علم of تمدن, علم of sociology, علم of culture, علم of anthropology. Ibn Khaldun, in that علم العمران, is talking about religion and how religion, how values, how ethics create civilizations. All his principles are from the Quran. Oppression leads to destruction. Akhlaq are the basic, all principles. But how he used them in sociology, and that's integration. Shatibi, just give you one. I'm sorry, Prof. Becoming different. Okay, so I'll just give you one example about this Imam Shatibi, who introduced the idea of maqasid al-Sharia in a more dynamic and integrated manner from usul al-fiqh. He brought the idea of maqasid. Maqasid become a framework for social and for Umran. You know, before Imam Shatibi, Al-Ghazali, Al-Nawawi, Al-Izz ibn Abdul Salam, Al-Qarafi, all these, they talk about maqasid. Al-Juwayni, they talk about maqasid al-Sharia. Maqasid Sharia are the 5 values which all we know. Imam Shatibi come and say, okay, there is maqasid al-Sharia, but there is also maqasid al-Mukallaf. The maqasid al-Sharia or maqasid al-Sharia, that's what Allah intends, which is protection of religion, protection of intellect, protection of wealth. But the Mukallaf, you as a human being, you as Khalifa on earth, what is your maqasid? So he brings to the center the idea of the human being and what is his maqasid. That's the maqasid of Allah. He wants you, or he give you the Sharia to do this protection. But you, what are your maqasid? So it means he shifted the thinking of Sharia to the human being, to the person. Person means society, means family, means culture, means dynamics. Means he was telling us that the Sharia can also be very important focus. Not only the maqasid, we just left ourselves in the, and then what he said, what is the maqasid al-Mukallaf? What is the maqasid of the Khalifa? What is the maqasid of the human being in this world? He summarized a lot of there in details, but he summarized it in one sentence. He said, maqasid al-Mukallaf is to free himself from his own desires and grips and corruption with his own choice Look at the freedom. With your own choice, you take the responsibility to build your own life, your own society, your own tamaddun. With your own choice, as you are a servant of God without your choice. Servant here means creature of God. So Sharia is all based on this principle of a human being living in life, building his life with his own choice, but with this guidance of the maqasid al-Sharia. So later on he was saying that for this to happen, you need to understand the nafs of the mukallaf, the life of the mukallaf, the society of the mukallaf, the ahwal, call it ahwal, of the mukallaf. This is why what he say, if you want to, you get the fatwa as a faqih, and you want to give the fatwa, you don't rush to give the fatwa. The first step you do, you check in the Quran and Sunnah. If you want it, you find it okay, applicable, don't implement directly. فعرضها على حال الزمان وأهله. Introduce it in the social context, in the reality, in the place where you live, and check whether if you implement it, it will lead to more harm or less harm or solve. So he's talking about sociology, talking about implementation, talking about management, about governance, how to deal with people, how from the bottom, the heart of usul al-fiqh. And to me, I say that maqasid al-sharia is a sociology science. It's not the Sharia. Yeah, we got it from Sharia, but it's a sociology to regulate. So brothers and sisters,
Looks like
I
you're
don't want to
excited
give you
right now.
another muhadara, but it's really wonderful today. We have learned a lot from our two professors, each one of them in his own way. He raised many important questions, many important things. And then I think we take it from here. We need to deepen our thinking, our discussions, our critique, our things. Here, from here we move, inshallah. May God bless you all. And we end our session with the reading of Surah Al-Asr. And maybe our brother can continue.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Jazakumullah khair. Thank you, sir. So now concluded already, dua is recited, so we can adjourn, inshallah. There's a cup of tea. My apology for our virtual attendance. You could have your breakfast, evening tea virtually. So thank you. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Wal asri innal insana lafi khusr illa alladhina amanu wa amilus salihati wa tawasaw bil haqq wa tawasaw bis sabr. Is anyone can take the photograph? with
Yeah,
all
we
the
want to have a
Muslims?
photo together with our
So
professor.
the session is adjourned. We are taking photograph.
Come, Prof. Murad, come. Come. Come, brothers and sisters, let's have a photo together. Come.